excited to be here in the state of my birth to talk about an exciting topic, and that is the Black homesteaders of the South. Now, what I will share with you will be what I call the untold stories. That is, we're going to change the narrative, that single narrative that only African Americans were sharecroppers. We're going to change that and talk about those untold stories. I will provide you with an overview of the Homestead Act of 1862, the eligibility requirements, what is the application process, what can you learn from the land entry papers, what is a land patent, and then we'll go into the untold stories. Now I want you to take a look at this poster. What you see in this poster is free land. In fact, this poster was developed by the National Homestead Park Service, and it commemorated the 2012, the 150th anniversary of the Homestead Act. But you see here, free land, millions of acres, and you also see the American dream. Well, what does the American dream mean to an African American? Well, we're looking at education, the right to vote, work for wages, absolutely, that was part of the dream, religious freedom, safety, land and home ownership. That's what the American dream is. But I have a quote here, and this is from historian, documentarian, and genealogist Leonard Smith. And Leonard Smith wrote after reading the book, as Black Americans research and follow their ancestors' paper trails, they further verify that they were resilient and resourceful people against all odds. Documenting land ownership under the Homestead Act of 1862 is an excellent piece of family history. It is not just the valuable genealogical and community information it may contain, it can also show the trials and tribulations involved in obtaining and keeping the land. So let me go on to what the Homestead Act of 1862 is all about. The Homestead Act was signed by Abraham Lincoln May 20th, 1982, and it went into effect January 1st, 1863. In fact, the first homesteader homesteaded in Beatrice, Nebraska, and his name was Daniel Freedman. Now, in order to become a homesteader, the individual had to be over the age of 21, never take up arms against the United States, a single woman, widows, immigrants, and later former slaves could apply for this land. The next part of this whole eligibility is that they had to complete an application. They had to settle on the land. They had to file an application and pay a small filing fee. So it wasn't free. They had to pay just a small filing fee. They had to cultivate, improve, and live on that land for a minimum of 5 years. They had to bring witnesses and then post that information in the newspaper. And then they went back to file for a deed of title and pay another small fee. So that's what it's all about. Now, I want you all to understand that the Act's history, with this Act's history, over 2 million individuals homesteaded, 2 million. So I'm hoping in this room we have some homesteader descendants because clearly the land was there. But let me move to something else, and that's called the Southern Homestead Act. And the reason I'm bringing up the Southern Homestead Act is because, remember, I said this act was signed in 1862. What was happening in 1862? Civil War. And so what else? When you look at the eligibility, Were African Americans eligible if they were enslaved? No, because they were not considered citizens at that time. But later, and I'll go into that, there was the Southern Homestead Act. Now, this act came in 1866, and it came about because of several Reconstruction amendments, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. Now, individuals could get up to 80 acres of land, and they really focused on seeing if African Americans would apply and be able to get this land. But there were some problems. And the problem was that many, once enslavement was over, they signed labor contracts. I mean, I even found my ancestor on a labor contract. Well, if you signed a labor contract, you can't turn around and walk away. You had to fulfill that contract, which meant that you probably did not get that land at that particular time. This Southern Homestead Act was also poorly administered. They didn't have the land offices set up. There was a lot of bureaucracy, and hence this act really was repealed. It was repealed in 1876. However, it did not mean that Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Florida, and Alabama could not be a part of this homestead public land. Now, I talked about what happened with the 1866 amendment. Well, there was an ad in the paper. I found this in Troy, Alabama, and basically they were asking for the offices to be set up. And there was a statement in this newspaper article saying the fact that Negroes are allowed to secure homesteads under the laws is one fact which ought to be public. That is, people need to know about it. And so they said we need to be able to communicate. Unfortunately, many of the African Americans do not read. So they needed to come up with some kind of way of letting people know about this act. And what I have said to many people, you know, there's a very strong grapevine. They figured it out. They knew about this act. So let's talk about the public land states, because I'm often asked, well, what about land in South Carolina? Or what about land in Georgia? Well, the public land states are the states in brown. These are public land states. The states in blue or teal or purple on your screen, those are not public land states. So you will not find anybody applying for homestead land in those states. But all those other states, yes, those states were available for individuals to apply for that land. So let me go into another direction for a minute. How did we get involved? We meaning, how did the Black homesteaders of the South come about? Well, there's a project as part of the Homestead National Historical Park, and it's the Black Homesteaders Project. And this project has been gathering stories of individuals in the Great Plains. And those stories have been added to the National Park Service website. Well, one of the things we noticed is that many African Americans from other states were not represented on this website. And I was approached and asked to see what I could do. And through a grassroots effort, as was mentioned by Ms. Newsom, I reached out to people and started talking about the Homestead Act, even to the point of saying, did your ancestors get land under the Homestead Act? And I would get, no, everybody was enslaved. My ancestors didn't get land, but that's not the case, because indeed they did. So this is still a part of the Great Plains, as you can see. But let me tell you something. The Black homesteaders do exist. And these are individuals that applied for and received a patent for up to 160 acres of land. That's a lot of land. And they all had to be over the age of 21, which they were. We found men, single women, and widows applying. Some were free people of color. Some were formerly enslaved. And some were members of the United States colored troops. And this is something that the different researchers would find as they began to find the story, because that's what it's all about, find and tell the story. So what did it take? Well, they did need a little money, a little. And they needed that money because if you're going to have 160 acres of land, you need farm tools, you need livestock, you need seeds, you need skills. And agricultural skills, I would say that's probably top on our list. We had the agricultural skills. Animal husbandry, carpentry, blacksmiths. They needed skills, and probably more skills that I have mentioned. And then there was a need for community support, witnesses, individuals that would testify that the homesteader, or quote, the claimant, did what they said they would do. So this is what they needed to even get into that process. Now, the goal is to obtain a land patent. That's the goal. Now, patents are legal documents that transferred the land ownership from the United States government to individuals. And this is the land patent of my ancestor, Peter Clark. And I'll say more about Peter Clark later. But this land patent was found in the book of one of his daughters. He received his land in 1896. Upon the death of his daughter, Hester, her granddaughter was shaking a book, and the land patent fell out of the book. So the family has the original land patent. And I can tell you, it is so exciting when I actually go to the National Archives and I copy some of the files and I find a land patent in the file. I will make a picture, a special picture, and send it to a descendant. In fact, this is a picture of Luann Merrills. Luann took a picture with the book, but behind Luann is the land patent that has been in her family for a long time. In fact, she's known that her family owned land for over 50 years. But guess what, folks? When you get that land patent, that's the end of the process, okay? It's the end of the process. But I want to tell you all how I found out about my great-great-grandfather, Peter Clark, owning land. This is my grandmother. And my grandmother celebrated her 129th heavenly birthday on Saturday. And she told me my granddaddy, Peter Clark, owned a lot of land in Maurepas, Louisiana. So that started me on my research. I wanted to find Peter Clark's land. And one way that you could find it right now is to go to the Bureau of Land Management. Now, some of you will find when you're doing your research on ancestry, you may find a land patent. But if you also go to the Bureau of Land Management, put in an ancestor's name, it may be somebody that you know owned the farm. You may find that in the census, they were farmers, they owned their land. Check it out, go see if they were indeed homesteaders. So I put in Peter Clark's name, and as the arrows point down, you can see his name came up, the year he received his land, the document number, which is the patent number, the state of Louisiana, St. Helena Meridian. They give me the township and the range, and that was in Livingston Parish. Also, additional information came up. I know now that Peter Clark went to the land office in New Orleans because it's on this document. I know that it was definitely the authority to give him this land or to allow him to have this land was because of the May 20th, 1862 Homestead Act. It's in the document. So there's no question that I'm looking at homestead land. Then I know that he received 159.33 acres of land. And this is Peter Clark. My grandmother gave me this picture after she told me her granddaddy owned a lot of land. And this is the patent that you may see on the Bureau of Land Management site, and you may also see this same document on Ancestry.com. Same information, his name, the location of the land, the number of acres. This was signed by Grover Cleveland, President of the United States, on the 8th of April, 1896. So, do you think this is it? We don't have to do anything else now? Well, you can't get here until you do something else. So that if you find a land patent, folks, you are at the end of the process. I want to take you to the beginning of the process. Now, did you know that the applications, they're called land entry case files, are available at the National Archives? Yes, lots of information, details that you would not know about unless you had the application to look at it. And this is and those applications are in boxes like this. This is a box. This is a whole family in Louisiana, and I ordered the records. And I just sat there. I was so excited just because I knew this whole family is out of Covington. And I ordered the files, and I sat there and I copied every single land entry case file. You see this little, on the side, you see where these applications are all stuffed in the box. You may have 50 applications in that box. And I can tell you, when I went to the National Archives and I requested Peter Clark's box, I could feel Peter Clark, I could feel my grandmother and my great-grandmother standing behind me as I opened his file, and I saw in there Peter Clark from Maurepas, Louisiana. I knew I had the right person. You know, you have to be very quiet in the National Archives, but I was ready to jump up and do the happy dance. So let me tell you what you can find in these files, because this is the exciting part of it. You'll know, of course, the settler's name. You'll know when that person was born, where he was born, his age. You'll get an idea of when he settled on the land, what is the land, where is the land located, how much was the filing fee, because you're going to see a receipt. So you're going to know exactly how much they paid, $12, $6, or what have you, but you will see it. You're going to see the improvements that they made, because they're going to document it. They're going to tell you about the outhouse and about the corn crib and about the 12 by 18 room house and the kitchen. I mean, you get all of those details. You wouldn't get those details by just looking online, because the land entry case files are not online. You have to order them. You'll also find out whether that individual signed his name or used an X as his mark. Then you will find the witnesses. I want to tell you, the witnesses are fantastic. That's a whole nother story about following the witnesses. And I followed every single witness on my ancestors' land application. And it's very interesting, because the witnesses' children ended up marrying each other. And the reason I know is because I tracked every last one of them. And then you'll get the land patent number and the number of acres and maybe other information. Some controversy, because it's not all good, okay? Some things you may have. So I want to focus on the Louisiana Black homesteaders. And you see those little red dots? Those little red dots are where we actually found Black homesteaders and where the stories are written in the book. We have 18 land owners from 9 parishes. You see those parishes: Ascension, Bossier, East Baton Rouge, East Feliciana, Livingston, St. Helena, Washington, West Feliciana, and Claiborne. All of those stories are in the book. Now take a look at how much land, how many homesteaders were actually granted land in Louisiana. 22,988. Now, out of those 22,988, we should also find some Black homesteaders in here. But the point is that only 9% of the land that was available was actually proved up. They had a lot of land, 27,000 acres of land in Louisiana, but only 9%. But we're going to find that 9% of those homesteaders that made up that 22,988 homesteaders. These are the names of the homesteaders from Louisiana. Do you recognize anybody here? Anybody? Baptiste. Ah, okay, great, wonderful. So I'm going to start off by giving you a few examples of what's in the file. So this is a person by the name of Labrum Brock. In his file, he was 26 years old, a farmer, and self-employed. And he listed where he was born in Dillon, Mississippi. He applied on September the 22nd, 1884. And he lived in Mississippi with a man named William Brock before he applied for this land. He's a native-born citizen of the United States. Now, I'm going to give you just little pieces of what you can find in the file, just to let you know you are getting a story. That story is coming right before your eyes, and you're reading this and saying, oh, I didn't know this. 26 years old. I mean, that right there would make you jump. He put, I am a native citizen of the United States over the age of 21, which is part of the requirements. You had to be over the age of 21. Well, the other documents show that he was 26 years old. Then there's a part where they're asking him to describe his land. And he said, on the 1st of January, 1885, I built a dwelling house, a smokehouse, a crib. He went on to talk about he cleared acres of land for 6 seasons, and all of his improvements were valued at $150. He was just telling us what he did. And there's just so much more to learn about him. But he also had witnesses. And those are the witnesses that you would want to follow when you get a homestead land application. And he put them down there. So we can see Josiah Broomfield, Willis Broomfield, Jordan Lee, and Green Andrews. I wonder who they are. They could be family members. We don't know. Back to the National Park Service, a story was submitted for Labrum Brock. And I want you to look at that line with the arrow pointing. He soon moved out of his family home. Brock indicated in his homestead application that he lived with William Brock in Mississippi before making his claim. This may have been William Brock, a white man living in Pike County, Mississippi at the time. It is likely that William Brock was related or was himself the enslaver of Laban's family. This is the story that was written by the descendant. And this is the story that's in the book. Now, I want to tell you about a site. So you now know about the Bureau of Land Management. You know that you need the land entry case files. But have any of you heard of the HistoryGeo.com site? Well, this is a site where you will find the first landowners on a map. And this is what's on the map for Labrum Brock. You see Labrum, you see Andrews Green, who was one of his witnesses. You see Jordan Lee, who was one of his witnesses. Those witnesses were also homesteaders. And this is one of the things that you will see over and over again. So HistoryGeo is the site you want to go to. Well, let me take you to just another story. This is another Louisiana homesteader from Washington Parish. The name is Thomas Pittman. And Thomas Pittman put in his application in 1899. But he canceled his application, and this is the reason, and this is in the file, by the way. He canceled his application because he said he was threatened by certain white people. And his family members encouraged him to just relinquish, give it up, don't follow through. He thought about it, and then he said, reinstate my application. Can you imagine just reading this in the file? He reinstated his application, and yes, he did get his land. And this is one of those things where we clap because he didn't let the intimidation or the threats stop him from doing what he wanted to do, and that's get the land. Now, this is something different. Remember I told you that you would see newspaper postings of land? Well, this is a newspaper posting, and this is in Covington, Louisiana. And the homesteader is Josiah Cyprian. Well, one of the things I noticed as I went through each of his applications or anything that he had to have signed, Walter L. Cohen's signature was there. You all know who Walter L. Cohen is. And so I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? Why is Walter L. Cohen's signature in here? Well, Walter L. Cohen had the position of the U.S. Land Officer, and he was given that position by the President Theodore Roosevelt. And so when you're looking at these files, you look at everything on the file, even the name of the register, because I didn't even think that they had a black register for any of the states. And I found Walter L. Cohen's name. So this is another story. This is a story that's in the book, but it's also on the National Park Service website. And it's for the Louisiana homesteader, George Paysinger, and he was out of plain dealing. Now you see this beautiful desk? Well, this desk right now is at the Bossier Library. And George Paysinger applied for his land in December of 1874. The exciting part about this is that George was a master architect, he was a builder, he was a craftsman, and a farmer. And among many other achievements in his life, as a former enslaved person, he served as a juror for the Second Judicial Court in Bossier Parish. And we found this in the newspaper. Many of the stories are supplemented by additional research. So this is the notice of George Paysinger. This is what was put in the newspaper. And you can see on here are his witnesses. Now this was 1880. Remember, we're talking 5 years they had to live on this land. So you're not going to see something 1874 and 1875 they have the land. In fact, some of these individuals will have stayed on that land 10 years, 12 years before they actually received their land patents. But this is something else I found. And this was a newspaper clipping in the Bossier Banner in 1908 when George passed away. Uncle George Paysinger died near Roberta on the 9th, age 86 years old. Uncle George was born in Houston County, Georgia, and was brought to Louisiana as the property of Hamilton and Hodges by Gideon Allen during 1845. As a slave, he was humble and industrious. As a freed man, intelligent and upright. Interesting. Look at who George Paysinger is living near. Can you all see that? Can you see Hamilton? Can you see Robert Witch? These are the people that were signing off for him. But he lived next door, even in the tract book. And I spoke to one of his descendants. I said, look at the tract book, because all of these, the land is put in a tract book, and you can see who's living next to each person. So one of the exciting parts about this whole story is that the family still owns the land. To this day, they still own George Paysinger's land. I mentioned women, and yes, women do apply. They could and they got it. And this is a story about Phoebe Ann Bartlett, and this is an Ascension Parish story. So I've given you different parishes because I'm talking about what's happening in Louisiana. And she was enslaved on the Waterloo Plantation in Ascension Parish. She was enslaved there until she was emancipated. But the bottom line is the land that she ended up getting is near the Waterloo Plantation. And it's an exciting story to read because, you know, her great-granddaughter said, who would have thought that this enslaved woman would have been able to get that land? And she sent this note saying, I'm so proud of my great-great-grandmother Phoebe Franklin and her industrious and steadfast attitude that has been handed down throughout the generations to the daughters of her maternal line. A formerly enslaved woman did not allow anything to hinder her from pursuing an opportunity that could benefit her and her offsprings for years to come. And you see the little blue dot and the arrow, that's Phoebe Franklin's land, and next to her is one of her witnesses. So we're seeing the witnesses are also homesteaders. Then we have Andrew and Sarah Richardson. Sarah ended up getting the land because Andrew passed away. And so this will give you an idea of how Sarah is now shown as the first landowner of that land in St. Helena Parish. Now, somebody mentioned Baptiste. You know who Baptiste is? Well, Charles Baptiste served as a witness to my great-great-grandfather, Peter Clark. And when I say follow the witnesses, I decided to follow Charles Baptiste. I found out so much information about him. He also served as a witness for my grandmother when she got married in 1913. So you're talking about people that know each other. So I reached out to my mother and I said, who is Charles Baptiste? Because his name is also in our family Bible. And she said, oh, he's a friend of my grandmother, my mother's grandmother. And she said, oh, and he has a brother named Pete. And she went on to give me the names of the other family members. Well, Charles Baptiste, upon getting his land, also provided funding or land to the school district in Maurepas, Louisiana. And this is one of the things that you will find. You will find they're donating land for the schools, they're donating land for the church. Some of the churches are being named after them with the street numbers. So this is what I learned about Charles Baptiste. And at the top, you see two little blue dots. His brother, Pete, was also a homesteader. And this was before I looked up anything. And my mother told me the name, Pete. So she knew about this family. And that's just something that's just exciting. And then you see all the other people that lived around him. Now, I'm just giving you another example, and I'm going to wrap it up. But this is the claimant testimony. This is what a file looks like. And Garmacino Vidal was a member of the United States Colored Troops, and he was also a cigar maker. And he would travel from New Orleans to Maurepas, and that's where his homestead was. And he described what he did with the land, and it was valued at $300. He also provided information about who was in the family. He had a wife and an adopted daughter, and that was in his record. He listed all of his witnesses, and I turned around and I pulled some of the witnesses' folders. But one other thing I want to tell you, there are two witnesses on here that really piqued my interest. One is Benjamin Frazier, who was also in the United States Colored Troops, also applied for homestead, and was also a witness to my grandmother when she got married. Henry Tinkshell was a witness for Peter Clark when he signed his, he was a witness for Peter Clark for his homestead land. So these people know each other. You know, this is the one thing that you will discover when you go through these land entry case files. They know each other. And so Henry and Garmacino, look where they're living. They have land right next door to each other. So I want to just conclude with a few things. First of all, these are the descendants that contributed to the Black Homesteaders of the South book. That's right, we have 18 stories in the book, and these are the individuals that contributed to that book. Now, what do I want to share with you, or to push you, or to consider? First of all, if you find that your ancestors own land, share your stories. Share your stories with the National Park Service. Can you imagine going to the National Park Service and pushing a button that says Louisiana, and all the homesteaders in Louisiana pop up? But that's what we're trying to do. Also, I have created a Descendants of African American Homesteaders Facebook group. And the purpose of that group is to educate, to encourage, to inspire individuals to look for that land. That is something that all of us should look for, because it's not a single narrative of sharecropping. It's more than that. So follow the footsteps of your ancestors. You certainly can do it with the homestead land entry papers. And once you find that land pattern, you know you have a journey to go on.